George Peppard. George, welcome to Night Comfort.
Well, thank you, Tom.
And
Nice to
welcome
be here.
to Sacramento.
Thank you. Nice to be here, too. We're driving out to the airport today to get some luggage, and I noticed that corn should be ripe and...
George Peppard is remembered by millions as the dashing writer opposite Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's and the cigar-chomping leader of the A-Team. On screen, he was confident, suave, and larger than life. But here's the contradiction. Behind the Hollywood image was a man who struggled with marriages, addiction, and the quiet role of being a father to 3 children. So, whatever happened to George Peppard's kids? George Peppard's path to stardom was anything but ordinary. Born in Detroit in 1928, he served in the Marine Corps before studying engineering, only to abandon that secure path to chase acting. He trained at Carnegie Mellon and later the prestigious Actors Studio in New York, determined to make it in Hollywood. His breakthrough came in 1961 when he starred opposite Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. As the aspiring writer Paul Varjak, Peppard became an instant icon, suave, magnetic, and embodying the cool sophistication of the era. Critics at the time praised him as the next big leading man, and audiences around the world fell in love with his quiet charm. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Peppard's career was filled with highs and lows. He played cowboys, soldiers, and detectives, but he often resisted being typecast. In Banachek, the hit NBC series of the early 70s, he portrayed a sharp-witted insurance investigator with confidence and flair. Fans admired his cool demeanor, but Peppard himself later admitted he longed to move from leading man roles to more complex character work. "I wanted to disguise myself," he once said. "I didn't want to play the same part over and over." But Hollywood is unforgiving. By the late 70s, Peppard had faced financial struggles and personal demons, even mortgaging his home to fund his 1978 passion project, 5 Days from Home. While the film brought him pride, it failed to restore his leading man status. Then, in the 1980s, came the role that defined him for a new generation, Colonel John Hannibal Smith on the A-Team. With his trademark cigar and catchphrase, "I love it when a plan comes together," Peppard became a television icon. Children of the 80s didn't know him as Audrey Hepburn's co-star. They knew him as the mastermind leader of a band of misfit heroes. Peppard's career was not without its challenges. He struggled with alcoholism for years before finally getting sober in the late 1970s. Afterward, he became a dedicated advocate, spending time helping others through recovery. He once said, "I spent too many years drinking. Now I want to spend the rest of my life helping." And if you are into classic Hollywood icons, amazing stories, and newly discovered insights, then hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, and your support will mean a lot to our channel. By the early 90s, even as he battled lung cancer, he refused to slow down. Just days before his death in 1994, he was still working, filming a new pilot called The P.I. It was a testament to his determination. On screen until the very end. Peppard earned a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and remains etched in pop culture memory. Yet for all his fame, his greatest role may not have been on the screen at all, but at home, as a father to 3 children whose lives carried his story far beyond Hollywood. If George Peppard's career was marked by reinvention, his personal life was marked by turbulence. Over the course of his life, he married 5 times, and from those marriages came 3 children who would carry his legacy into the next generation. His first marriage was to Helen Davies, a union that began in 1954 before George became a Hollywood name. At the time, Peppard was still a young actor chasing roles, and Helen stood by him through those early struggles. Together, they had 2 children, Bradford, born in 1955, and Julie, born in 1959. But as George's fame skyrocketed in the early 1960s, particularly after the massive success of Breakfast at Tiffany's, the pressures of Hollywood began to take their toll. Long absences, grueling film schedules, and the temptations of stardom strained their marriage. By 1964, after a decade together, the couple divorced. In 1966, Peppard found love again on set. He married actress Elizabeth Ashley, his co-star in The Carpetbaggers. The chemistry between them was undeniable, both on screen and off, but it was also volatile. Ashley would later describe their relationship as passionate but stormy, fueled by George's intensity and his struggles with alcohol. Their marriage produced his third child, Christian Peppard, born in 1968. Looking back, Ashley admitted, "George was brilliant, but he could also be difficult. I never stopped loving him, even when I couldn't live with him." They divorced in 1972, but their bond was never completely severed. They remained connected through their son and through a deep respect for one another. After his split from Ashley, George would marry 3 more times. In 1975, he wed Sherry Bossier, an actress best known for her work in television, but the marriage was short-lived. Next came Alexis Adams, a union that also ended in divorce. Finally, in 1992, Peppard married Laura Taylor, a Florida real estate agent who remained by his side until his death in 1994. Through these ups and downs, one constant in his life was his role as a father. It wasn't always an easy role for George. His battles with alcoholism, which he only overcame in the late 1970s, often made him absent or distant during his children's younger years. But after getting sober, he made a conscious effort to be more present. He attended school events, spent more time at home, and worked to repair relationships. In one of his last interviews, Peppard reflected on his family with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I've had good roles and bad roles. I've won and lost. But the best thing I ever did was raise 3 fine children." Brad, Julie, and Christian grew up in very different eras of George's life. The first 2 during his rise to stardom, and the third during his volatile but passionate years with Elizabeth Ashley. Each would later speak of him not just as the actor on the screen, but as the complicated man behind it, flawed, sometimes distant, but always unforgettable. George Peppard may have been a Hollywood star to the world, but to 3 people, he was simply Dad. His children grew up with a father who was equal parts glamorous, complicated, and often distant, but whose presence shaped their lives in lasting ways. His eldest, Bradford Brad Peppard, was born in 1955 during George's first marriage to Helen Davies. Brad grew up during the height of his father's stardom, when Breakfast at Tiffany's and other films made George a household name. Unlike his father, Brad did not chase Hollywood fame. Instead, he pursued a more private life, away from the cameras. For Brad, the legacy of being George Peppard's son was not about celebrity, but about living quietly while carrying the weight of a famous name. Next came Julie Peppard, born in 1959, also to George and Helen. Julie shared her father's love of the arts, though she too lived largely outside the glare of Hollywood. While her life has been kept private, those who knew her described her as thoughtful and strong-willed, qualities she inherited from her father. George once remarked, "My daughter has more courage than I do." Julie's presence in his life reminded him of the quieter joys beyond the movie set. The youngest of George's children is Christian Peppard, born in 1968 during his marriage to actress Elizabeth Ashley. Unlike his older siblings, Christian followed a path closer to the entertainment industry. He became an actor, writer, and documentary filmmaker, appearing in independent films and producing projects that explored human stories. In interviews, Christian has spoken about the duality of growing up as the son of a star, the pride of seeing his father on screen, and the challenge of living in that long shadow. "When your father is known to millions," he once said, "you have to find your own voice, your own identity." And that's not easy. By the time George passed away in 1994, his children were adults, and each had taken very different directions in life. Yet at his funeral, they came together, Brad, Julie, and Christian, united not by Hollywood or fame, but by the memory of the man they knew at home. For all of George's flaws, his battles with alcohol, his turbulent marriages, his constant drive, his children remember him as someone who, in his later years, made a conscious effort to be present, sober, and honest. In his last interviews, George said, "If I am remembered for anything, let it be for raising 3 fine children. That's the only role that really matters." By the time of his death in 1994, George Peppard was not only a father of 3, but also a grandfather. Obituaries noted that he was survived by 3 grandchildren, though their names and lives have been kept private, a striking contrast to the public intensity of George's career. His legacy, therefore, quietly continued through his family line, even as Hollywood remembered him for the roles that made him famous. Peppard's later years were a mixture of determination and decline. After decades of battling alcoholism, he became sober in the late 1970s and spent much of his later life helping others struggling with addiction. He said, "I wasted too many years drinking. The only way to make sense of it is to spend the rest of my life helping." In the early 1990s, Peppard was diagnosed with lung cancer, a consequence of decades of heavy smoking. He was rarely seen without a cigarette or later the signature cigar he carried as Hannibal on the A-Team. Even as illness took its toll, he refused to retire. In fact, just days before his death, he had finished shooting a new pilot for a detective series called The P.I. For George, the work was not just a career, but a calling. He was an actor until the very end. On May 8, 1994, George Peppard died of pneumonia, a complication of his cancer, at the age of 65. His funeral was a quieter affair compared to the glitter of Hollywood premieres, but it carried deep meaning. He was laid to rest in Northview Cemetery in Dearborn, Michigan, returning to the state where he was born. At his side were his children and grandchildren, mourning not the Hollywood icon, but the man they had known in private. Today, George Peppard is remembered in 2 very different ways. To film lovers, he remains Paul Varjak, the charming writer opposite Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. To television fans, he will always be Colonel John Hannibal Smith from the A-Team, puffing on a cigar and grinning as he declared, "I love it when a plan comes together." And to his family, he is remembered as a complicated but loving father and grandfather, a man who stumbled but always tried to make things right. Perhaps Peppard himself summed up his legacy best. Near the end of his life, he reflected, "Getting married and having a bad divorce is just like breaking your leg. It heals, but you still limp. I've had my share of limps, but if people remember me for my work and for raising good children, that's enough." George Peppard's life was a story of contrasts. To the world, he was Paul Varjak, the charming writer opposite Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and later, the cigar-chomping Colonel Hannibal Smith in the A-Team. On screen, he was confident, suave, and larger than life. But away from the cameras, he was a man wrestling with his demons, struggling through broken marriages, addiction, and the challenge of being a father. In the end, what defined him wasn't just the roles he played, but the honesty with which he faced his flaws. He admitted his failures, fought to get sober, and in his later years, worked to rebuild his relationships. His 3 children, Brad, Julie, and Christian, grew up in very different eras of his life. But together they carry the quieter legacy of the man behind the star. Through them, and through his grandchildren, George's story continues, not in tabloids or headlines, but in the private memories of a family. When he died in 1994, Hollywood lost a leading man, but in Dearborn, Michigan, a family laid to rest a father and grandfather. That duality, the legend on screen and the flawed man at home, is perhaps what makes George Peppard's story so human and so enduring. Today, he's remembered in many ways as the romantic lead of a Hollywood classic, the mastermind of a beloved TV show, and as a man who stumbled, struggled, but always tried to make things right. Maybe his greatest legacy isn't just in his films or his famous catchphrases. Maybe it lies in the lessons he left his family, that success and failure both leave scars, and that even a man known for tough roles could reflect and admit in his own words. The best thing I ever did was raise 3 fine children. So what do you think? Is George Peppard's true legacy the roles that made him famous, or the family that carries on his name? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives behind the legends.